Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Well, hello, and welcome to Cineversary, a podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a masterful work of cinema. Every month, we send happy birthday wishes to a different film that's currently observing a joyous jubilee. We're talking about everything from a 20th to a 100th anniversary. I'm your host, Eric Martin, creator and moderator of the Cineverse Film Discussion Group that meets weekly on Zoom. So happy holidays to you and yours. Yep, we've reached the end of another year, well, one that many of us would probably like to forget, but nevertheless, 2020 did provide us the opportunity to honor so many wonderful and worthy classic movies, did it not? And this month is no exception because we'll be commemorating the silver anniversary of one of the most beloved and consequential films of the last 25 years. It's Disney Pixar's Toy Story, which first hit theaters back in late 1995. Joining me on this installment is the perfect guest. His name is Tom Sito, an animation historian, author, and professor, as well as past animator for Disney, Hanna-Barbera, DreamWorks, and Warner Brothers. He's an artist who's been named among the 100 most important people in animation. Tom and I will explore, practically to infinity and beyond, why Toy Story is worth celebrating all these years later, its impact and legacy, what we can learn from Toy Story today, how it stood the test of time, and much more. I'm excited to bring Tom aboard, but first we should delve into the backstory on this month's feature. Per Wikipedia, Toy Story is a 1995 American computer animated comedy film produced by Pixar Animation Studios and released by Walt Disney Pictures. The first installment in the Toy Story franchise, it was the first entirely computer animated feature film, as well as the debut feature film from Pixar. The movie was directed by John Lasseter in his feature directorial debut and written by Joss Whedon, Andrew Stanton, Joel Cohen, and Alex Sokolov from a story by Lasseter, Stanton, Pete Docter, and Joe Ranft. The film features music by Randy Newman, was produced by Bonnie Arnold and Ralph Guggenheim, and was executive produced by Steve Jobs and Edwin Catmull. Toy Story features the voices of Tom Hanks, Tim Allen, Don Rickles, Wallace Shawn, John Ratzenberger, Jim Varney, Annie Potts, Arlie Ermey, John Morris, Laurie Metcalf, and Eric Von Detten. Taking place in a world where anthropomorphic toys come to life when humans are not present, the plot focuses on the relationship between an old-fashioned pull-string cowboy doll named Woody and an astronaut action figure named Buzz Lightyear, as they evolve from rivals competing for the affections of their owner Andy to friends who work together to be reunited with him after being separated from Andy. Following the success of Pixar's 1988 short film Tin Toy, the company was approached by Disney to produce a computer-animated feature film told from a small toy's perspective. Lasseter, Stanton, and Docter wrote early story treatments which were unfortunately rejected by Disney, who wanted the film's tone to be, quote, edgier, unquote. After several disastrous story reels, production was halted and the script was rewritten to better reflect the tone and theme Pixar desired, which was basically toys deeply want children to play with them, and this desire drives their hopes, fears, and actions. The studio, then consisting of a relatively small number of employees, produced Toy Story under only minor financial constraints. Toy Story premiered at the El Capitan Theater in Los Angeles on November 19, 1995, and was released in theaters in North America on November 22nd. It was the highest-grossing film during its opening weekend, eventually grossing over $373 million worldwide. Toy Story received critical acclaim and was praised for the technical innovation of the 3D animation, the wit and thematic sophistication of the screenplay, its musical score, and its vocal performances, particularly by Hanks and Allen. It's considered today to be one of the very best animated films ever made. Toy Story received 3 Academy Award nominations for Best Original Screenplay, Best Original Song for You've Got a Friend in Me, and Best Original Score, as well as winning a Special Achievement Academy Award. In 2005, the United States Library of Congress selected Toy Story for preservation in the National Film Registry, finding it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The success of this film launched a multimedia franchise consisting of 3 sequels, starting with Toy Story 2 in 1999. Toy Story is actually one of the rare films that earns a perfect 100% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, where its average critical score is 9 out of 10. Pretty impressive. Okay, time for an original trailer flashback.
Sergeant?
Yes, sir.
Establish a recon post downstairs.
Code Red, repeat. We are at Code Red. Recon Plan Charlie, execute. Move, 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 move! It's a big one.
Walt Disney Pictures presents a totally new animated motion picture event.
Star Command, come in. Do you read me?
The story of two toys.
There seems to be no sign of intelligent life anywhere.
Hello?
Headed for a showdown.
My name is Woody. This is my spot.
I am Buzz Lightyear. I come in peace.
You are a child's plaything!
You are a sad, strange little man.
And playing by their own rules.
Draw! Got me again!
I don't like confrontations.
Buzz-looking alien!
Where? You're mocking me, aren't you?
Oh, impressive wingspan. Very good.
Oh, what? What? He can't fly.
Yes, I can.
Can't.
Can.
Can't!
This holiday season, the adventure takes off when toys come to life.
To infinity and beyond.
Toy Story.
Look out!
Can.
So it's that point in the show where I'm obliged to give you fair warning. Me and my guest, well, we may reveal crucial plot points from Toy Story in our forthcoming discussion. So if you're, let's say, among the 5 or 6 people who've never laid eyes on this film, yeah, you know what to do. It's now my pleasure to introduce master animator and USC film professor, Tom Sito. I want to introduce Tom Sito, legendary animator, animation historian, and teacher, and author of the book Moving Innovation, A History of Computer Animation. Tom, welcome to the Cineversary podcast, and thanks for agreeing to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Toy Story with me.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have an esteemed guest like you. I was checking out some of your creds on the internet, and it's so impressive, all the different animated content you've been involved with as a Disney animator, for Hanna-Barbera, for television and movies, and then your work, of course, in academia. Hats off to you, sir. That's quite a resume you have.
Thank you very much.
So let's get into this here. Where does Toy Story rank for you as an animated feature film, especially as a computer animated movie, Tom? Is this one of your favorites?
Oh, yes. Yes, it is. Toy Story will always have a place as one of the seminal turning points in film. I always rank Jurassic Park and Toy Story as the two films that really flipped the digital revolution, which is before those movies. If you were making a film and somebody said, let's use computers, your producer would say, that's ridiculous. And after those movies, if you made a movie and you said, let's not use computers, your producer would say, that's ridiculous.
Right.
That's the change that happened, but thanks to Toy Story.
But as far as where it ranks for you, I'm sure you have your personal favorites, whether it's traditional animation or computer animation, but does this rank highly for you?
Oh, yes, it does. Yeah. The story itself has a lot of warmth to it. The characters are terrific. The voices are terrific. And it's very believable.
Absolutely. I recall seeing Toy Story in a movie theater back in what must have been 25 years ago, like right now. Like I remember it was December. It was with a group of friends, and these were all adults, mind you. We didn't have any kids at the time, didn't bring any kids with. And we were completely awestruck by the entertainment. We were rewarded with this immersive eye candy from the first frame to the last. I recall several deep laughs that extended beyond the mere chuckle variety, fantastic, well-developed characters, voice acting of the highest caliber. And I think we also had a sense that we were witnessing something special, a kind of movie making that we wanted more of. And we certainly got it, of course. But while I admired and adored several of the, they call it the Disney Renaissance pictures, things like, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, a lot of those movies you were involved in, actually. I mean, I really admired and enjoyed those, the traditional 2D animation that preceded Toy Story. I think that Toy Story signified a major departure from convention and raised my expectations for how great an animated movie truly could be. Really left an impression on me just as a fan of movies and animation for that matter. So, Tom, why does Toy Story still matter 25 years later, and how has it stood the test of time? Why is this movie worth celebrating?
The reason why Toy Story is worth celebrating is that Toy Story was the culmination of about 20 years of basically experimentation and trial and error of individuals thinking, I want to try to make a digital feature film. I want to do the first digital feature film. Because the generation that created Toy Story, when they were young, like when we were young in the 60s, when you said computers were the kind of things behind the James Bond villain.
Right.
A computer was like this big thing with lots of lights and turning, videotape reels and all.
And the bigger the better, right?
Yeah, to set off nuclear weapons or something like that. The idea that you could do warm, fuzzy Disney characters with a computer seemed ridiculous. It's like even into the 80s, when you said computers, you were like Terminator death machines or guidance targeting for missiles or something.
Yes.
But the idea of like, let's make cartoons with these things, that just seemed insane. It was like, like cast iron Betty Boop or stainless steel Mickey Mouse,
right.
It'll never happen.
Uh-huh.
But the people who believed in wanting to make this happen, there was a certain dedicated cadre of people, and they weren't all from the same background. Some were like military people, some were scientists, some were avant-garde artists, some were hippie stoners. There's a lot of people in the 70s like smoking illegal substances, going like, whoa, let's make cartoons, man. Whoa. But they were all geniuses, and they all had this common goal, which is they wanted to try to create film, make film by an electronic means.
I know that John Lasseter, the director of this movie, often gets a lot of credit for his, vision and ambition here, and deservedly so. But who else do we need to kind of pat on the back a bit?
Well, let's see. There's a fellow named Ed Catmull, who was the head of the Disney company for a while. And Ed originally came out of the University of Utah as a scientist. He had worked a lot with the software and all. And he and a fellow named Alvy Ray Smith, who's originally from Texas, had developed the concept of alpha channel, which is basically you need to tell a computer what's a solid object and what is empty air. Because, like if I take my hands and I strike it on a table, when it reaches the surface of the table, my hands stop. A computer wouldn't understand. It would just keep going. It needed, to be taught, okay, this is a table. Like, the character's legs are under the table, but his hands are above the table. Those kind of basic things. A friend of mine who was a computer animator used to say, when you want to animate, you grab some paper, you sit down at your drawing table and you start drawing. We have to create paper and create pencil and create light.
Yeah. Makes sense.
There was a fellow named Jim Blinn, Dr. James Blinn, who was doing stuff at the Jet Propulsion Lab. And he did the first Voyager flyby simulations in around 1980. When the Voyagers blasted off to the outer planets, it was going to take about 2 or 3 years to get to anything.
Okay.
And JPL was very concerned about, what if it gets there and the cameras don't work?
Yeah, right.
What if for some reason the images don't come back? It turned out they did come back and they're glorious. They changed our way of thinking. But they were very concerned about, the public would say, what did you spend $2 billion on? Well, what's that thing doing out there? So he goes, so we need a simulation to explain to everybody what it was doing.
Gotcha.
And Blinn actually hired a few of his friends out of college who later on would become the engineering backbone of Pixar. And they all worked on these simulations. But, like right now, if you go on YouTube or something and look up Voyager flybys, and these films are gorgeous. They're the little satellites flying through the rings of Saturn, up to that point, around 1980, 81, 82, the only way you would see computer animation is if you went to a film festival, usually 10:30 at night or something, to be the computer films that show a couple of them.
Okay.
But this thing, the Voyagers, was on the evening news. You put on Walter Cronkite or something, and they would say, this is what the Voyager spacecraft is going to do. And they would play the simulation. So all of America watched these little clips, and it's stuck in your mind.
You're firing up my memory coils a little bit there. Yeah. I seem to recall seeing something like that on the evening news when I was a kid.
Yeah, and then these same guys, these same people that were working on this, also worked on Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan.
Okay.
The one Ricardo Montalban with his killer pecs and all. But there's the sequence called the Genesis effect, which is them explaining with a computer programs explaining to Kirk and Spock what the Genesis actually is. And so they did this thing of this planet being restored back to life by this thing.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Pretty cool in the movie. And that was the same year, I think 82, that Tron came out.
Yeah, and Tron came out. Yeah. Now, a lot of people like to say that Tron was the first, computer movie, first digital movie. And Tron is very good, and it has a lot of breakthrough stuff in it. But it's not completely digital. I mean, there's a lot of traditional stuff done that's made to look like digital. They even in actors in leotards with day glow masking tape going down their arms to look like lines. So like glow in the dark kind of like phosphorescent tape.
Sure.
And so they did a lot of like tricks with it and all. Even with the computer animation, still had to be printed out and then painted like traditional animation on cells with backgrounds and all.
Okay.
It was definitely another big step forward. Toy Story was the one where it all came together. Like all the ideas and stuff finally worked. When Pixar first got started, I mean, Pixar was originally the Lucasfilm Graphics Group. It was George Lucas's unit. And around 1986, he sold it to Steve Jobs. And Jobs originally was not really interested in making movies per se.
Yeah, I read that.
He wanted full color graphics on your home computer. If you do a search right now and you say, what did the computer screen look like in 1986 or 1985? It was mostly black and white.
That's right.
It was all black and white, it was snowy. And, maybe they could do a smile button or something. That was like the best you could do. Steve Jobs was, I want full color. I want you to be able to watch movies, on your computer, which the other engineers told him, that's crazy. Color's too expensive. It burns up too much memory, and people are happy with black and white. Why do you want to do that? So one of the things he did when acquiring Pixar was he wanted to figure this out about improving the abilities of home computers to have graphics.
Right.
And of course, the Pixar guys wanted to make movies. So for about 6 years, I think from 1986 to about 91. They made short films. They kept improving their technique. That's when they hired John Lasseter, too. It was like around 1986.
Yeah, those were the golden years when you'd go see the Pixar shorts before the start of a movie, like Tin Toy and the Snowman or the Snow Globe. I remember those.
Yeah, and you see, Tin Toy, actually, Toy Story began as, after Tin Toy won the Oscar. That's when that's also when Steve Jobs was convinced too, because like people I knew who worked at Pixar said every once in a while, he says Jobs was very volcanic at times in everything. He was famous for losing his temper and everything. The phrase they would say at Apple, they'd say, Steve's gone nonlinear today.
Euphemism.
He was saying, we're not a movie studio, we're an effing hardware store. I sell computers. like, why do you got film editors on staff? We're not going to make film. Like, well, actually, we are.
That's the G-rated version of what he probably said.
Yeah. And then what happened was, these shorts were made to advertise a breakthrough in their software. Something about like Luxo Jr. was about lighting, illumination, and Jerry's Game was about facial construction. And
interesting.
Each short had a little breakthrough, but they kept winning awards. And like when Tin Toy won an Oscar, that's when Steve Jobs went, oh.
Yeah, it's proof of concept right there.
Okay, yeah. So and then they negotiated a deal with Disney to help create their digital paint system, what's called CAPS. It's just the computer animated production system. Pixar engineers teamed up with Disney engineers and to sort of create this. And then I believe it's like the last scene of The Little Mermaid, the very last shot, was the first all digital scene in a Disney picture. But then the next film, Rescuers Down Under, was the first film, 1990, that was all digital. Like the whole thing was created. I mean, it was animated on paper. Yeah, we call it traditional or 2D. We differentiate. Like Toy Story, we would call 3D. And 3D doesn't mean like you wear glasses,
right.
Anything. It means it's a round kind of structure.
Yeah, you got better dimensionality, right?
Yeah. While 2D is about drawing it on paper,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would take each page and scan it.
So you're saying the Rescuers Down Under, it was traditional animation, but they rendered it through
Yes.
computers?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what it was. So they took each individual drawing, and they digitized it, and then they painted it and everything digitally.
So that was a
instead of
stepping stone
physical.
to get to Toy Story, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then based on that success, Disney and Pixar, started a relationship with each other. Because again, Pixar's like in another city. I mean, Pixar's in San Francisco. It's far away, up in the, from Hollywood, and Disney at that time didn't like contracting that kind of production work outside the studio. Like Disney's used to doing everything in house, but they did Who Framed Roger Rabbit, partly in England, and then they also did Nightmare Before Christmas, and those were both successes that were done outside the lot.
Okay.
So we said, okay, we can work out something out with this little company Pixar. Let's see what it does. Originally, they wanted to capitalize on the success of Tin Toy, and they went to Disney and pitched the idea of a Christmas special based on Tin Toy. And the studio executive at the time, Jeffrey Katzenberg, said, well, if you're going to go through all the trouble to build all the models and do all that stuff, you might as well make it a feature film. So then I said, okay, well, let's do that. So we'll do something with toys, And then after a while, the Tinny character just became a little too difficult to use in all the different things that the character would have to do, because he always has the symbols and the little instruments on him and everything, and it's very limited in movement. So then they said, okay, well, let's make like one of those dolls where you would pull the string and he'd say things.
Right. It was actually inspired by John Lasseter's Casper doll that had a pull string as a child.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they named him Woody after Woody Strode, the actor from Sergeant Rutledge.
Who'd also been in several Westerns.
Yeah, and the Buzz character was based on a toy from the 60s called Major Matt Mason, who was an astronaut.
Didn't know that. Wow. Okay.
His own little capsule and everything, and then Buzz obviously comes from Buzz Aldrin,
of course,
the astronaut on the moon. Yeah. So, but they had that Captain Video kind of like to infinity and beyond, kind of
the catchphrase of the movie. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Woody was a little more of a malevolent character. He really resented that Buzz was taking over the toy room, and actually, he's actually trying to get rid of him. He's actually trying to kill him, and not physically kill him, but maybe like he would have an accident or something like that.
Get him out of the way.
Fall behind the dresser, and get out of the way, and the character just came off dark, and one of the reasons why they cast Tom Hanks was because he had just done the movie A League of Their Own, about the female baseball players, and the great thing about his character in A League of Their Own is he plays basically an asshole, but a really nice, charming asshole.
That's well put. Yes.
Yeah. Well, he's a creep, but we kind of like him.
Tom Hanks, he's hard to hate.
And that's really like kind of like how the story evolved. And then they had a couple of meetings. Like I remember I was working in the Disney development department when they had this big pitch of all the Toy Story stuff to the big shots.
Okay.
And then I remember them all coming out of the meeting, and the head of the story department, named Joe Ranf, who was a dear friend of mine, he walked past my desk, and I go, Joe, how did it go? And he didn't say anything. He just rubbed his ass and went, ow.
Picture's worth 1,000 words there.
Yeah. Well, basically, they basically had to scrap the story.
Right.
Like everything that they had done up to that point, where they just said, this isn't really working. It's the whole negative thing isn't working. So they flipped to the story that we have currently. And films are sometimes like that. Like you have a whole, you have to be unafraid to change midstream.
That's right.
If something isn't working.
I read something like the writers, the key writers involved had only 2 weeks to turn around a rewrite or something like that. And amazingly, they did a fantastic job of completely rebooting this whole story and the characters and the tone, as you put it too, right?
Yeah, yeah, and and even while that was going on, remember I was saying that for the longest time that characters, people had a lot of trouble believing that you could make warm fuzzy Disney characters, on a computer.
Hmm.
Because computers was like Terminator stuff, or Star Wars, things. There were even people in production, in the Disney, hierarchy, who were encouraging Eisner and Katzenberg and Roy Disney to just junk this project and say, this thing isn't really working. Those guys up there don't know what they're doing. They never made a movie before. Let's cut bait now.
There's always going to be naysayers.
Yeah, yeah, and Lasseter actually had to rush into production a key scene of when Woody and Buzz are first face to face, standing on the bed, and they're arguing with one another.
Mm.
Where he goes, "You're a toy. Just face it, you're a toy." And Buzz is like, "You're a strange man." And,
Like one of the great lines.
yeah, and he actually pushed that scene into completion ahead of everything else.
Is that right?
Just as a demonstration to show we can make appealing characters using computer.
So they convinced the higher ups to proceed, I guess, huh?
Yeah, they were convinced with that, and yeah, there was a lot of naysayers. Even Steve Jobs at one point was getting a little disappointed about that, because he had bankrolled everything at Pixar. Like,
right.
No matter how many little films, those little award-winning films, like no matter how many little awards they got and an Oscar and stuff, that didn't really turn a profit. At the end of the day, Steve Jobs would have to open up his checkbook and write a check and keep the place alive. Insiders told me, they said Pixar should have gone out of business like several times, except that you had Steve Jobs, in your corner. I think they said that at one point he personally invested something about like 50 million of his own money.
Amazing.
And everything. I never saw a return. By 1994, maybe he was starting to think, maybe this thing isn't working out after all. But then the first test screenings started to come in with brilliant numbers. I mean, audiences that saw it said, "This is fantastic." And what's great about Toy Story was that not only did it turn Jobs a profit, it made him a billionaire.
I'll bet.
Really from a multimillionaire, he became a billionaire.
Yeah, I forget the sweetheart deal they had with Disney, but they got a cut of the box office. But the film grossed nearly $400 million in its first run, which again, for 1995 to 1996 dollars, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. It was very unusual, for something just that new to come on that strong. But like we look at all this stuff in hindsight now and think like, oh yeah, well, Pixar, that's great. They just crank these things out. But at the time, nobody was sure. Nobody knew it was really going to work.
That's right.
And it's brand new characters, and the look is very different than like sort of the traditional Disney stuff. And would audiences go for it? We don't know. But like I always say, if Toy Story wasn't a hit, you wouldn't have Shrek. You wouldn't have Frozen, you wouldn't have The Incredibles, you wouldn't have Ice Age, you wouldn't have Minions.
How to Train Your Dragon, all these franchises.
Yeah, all those things all came out because Toy Story was a hit.
Thank you for that astounding history lesson. I mean, listeners, you just got a valuable kind of walk through animation history there from a guy who was right there on the front lines. And thank you, Tom, for walking us through that, because that was fascinating to just kind of recall some of the details I'd never heard before. But yeah, first of its kinds tend to be warmly remembered and venerated. And Toy Story was the first of its kind. It was the first completely computer animated feature film. And it was a major zeitgeist experience for its time, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
I mean, it created an indelible impression on viewers and raised the bar for animated entertainment. And even though some of its CGI visuals in this 1995 movie may appear today, to be a little less than impressive because of how far we've come with technology. I mean, I rewatched the movie the other night. I absolutely still love it. It hasn't gone down any notches or anything, but yeah, you could see some of the flaws in the computer animation, but for what they did at the time, it's absolutely astounding. And I'm convinced that one of the reasons, despite those, visual limitations for 1995, one of the reasons that Toy Story remains timeless is that it appeals to viewers of all ages. It's easy to say that, right? Any cartoon slash animated Disney movie is going to appeal to all ages, of course, to some extent.
Mhm.
But to me, there's content and humor in there for adults to really gravitate to. And it instantly takes an adult like me back to a childhood time when we treasured and played with toys. And I think everyone can relate to that. Part of the brilliance is the central imaginative tenet, Tom, that toys have a secret inner life. They want to be played with, and there's an internal hierarchy among their ranks. And so I believe Toy Story will always maintain a freshness and relevance because of that concept and because of the exemplary execution of that concept.
Mhm.
And lastly, Tom, I think Toy Story still matters so much because the exceptional talent and passion demonstrated by the filmmakers involved, it just can't be denied. This movie was made by very skilled, creative, and adventurous human beings who, they used computer graphics as a tool in their craft, not the other way around.
Yes, yes. I think, when Pixar got started, there were a number of startups in Silicon Valley who were doing graphics. There was a company named Pacific Data Images. There was another company named DeGraff Warman, and there was a group called Whitney Damos. There was a bunch of companies doing stuff, and they were all started by software engineers and scientists, and they looked at everything as improving the software, improving the technique and all. What Pixar did that was different was that they focused on the story.
Yes.
They said, that's what we got to give to John Lasseter. It's that John and those guys really focused on making a very good, plausible story, working with the limitations of the media, because a lot of the scientists wanted to go right away for photoreal human beings. And saying, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't look right. The software is not there yet. The people are going to look like zombies. Well, okay, toys, a overhead lamp, things that are very simple in structure, geometric. We can do that now. I was talking with a dear friend named Jim Hillen, who's a longtime computer pioneer veteran, worked on a lot of great films and stuff like Interview with the Vampire and The Ghost Rider and all. And we worked together on Beauty and the Beast. And Jim told me, he said, Toy Story is the first film where I wasn't conscious I was watching a computer generated film. All I wanted to know was what's going to happen to Woody and Buzz.
That says it all. It's all about the story.
Yeah.
And I want to read you something really briefly from one of the co-writers, Andrew Stanton. We said anything that we break ground with, computer graphics wise, will be subservient to getting the story right, because that's what history has shown wins. And then he referenced things like Snow White, Star Wars, The Wizard of Oz. And of course, we remember those as, visually innovative for their time, especially if you watched it first when those movies were originally theatrically released. But we most remember them for the stories and the characters, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I appreciate all the anecdotes that you're providing. I mean, you were a fly on the wall, even if you didn't directly, work on Toy Story.
Yeah. I was at Disney up until there was Lion King, and then I was on Pocahontas, and then I was on Fantasia 2000, and Dinosaur, and then I went over to DreamWorks and everything, and to work on Prince of Egypt. So that was 1995 was that sort of key year when that was all happening.
So you weren't on the team that worked on Toy Story, correct? But you were friends with and kind of peripheral to a lot of things happening with that film, no?
Yeah, animation people were all like sort of like of a tribe, like we're all kind of like a group. We all know each other. It's kind of like stunt people all know each other. Hang out with each other and go,
Sure.
Oh yeah, I love the way you fell off that horse. So animators are the same way. And Joe Ramf and Robert Lentz, who are like two like the lead storyboard artists, were good friends of mine and stuff, and a number of the animators and stuff as well. So during that period, because again, like now, Pixar and Disney are linked. But at the time they were a separate company. But the studio was sharing talent with them back and forth. So we would send some of our senior story people up to help them, and they would send some of their senior people down to help on our films, to go back and forth.
Oh, I just love hearing these, tales from school from you. These are so fascinating. So just to segue, I mean, as an animator, what impresses you about Toy Story? Just as an animator, as a fan of the medium and as a, working artist in that medium, What is it about the animation of Toy Story that impresses you?
Besides the story being very good, the acting is good.
Okay.
Good character animation. We're not just like moving mouths to dialogue, like when you see stuff on television, that's like dialogue driven, which is like you use the same mouths, replacement mouths and stuff, and they say the dialogue, and the dialogue's very witty.
You mean animation on television, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
TV animation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It features. It's about acting. It's about like a lot of feature animators think like actors, and they take acting classes, and and they shoot reference of live action actors and study them, because it's about expressing yourself with your eyes and with your gestures, and and creating a whole character. And what's fun about Woody is that he's acting like Tom Hanks. He's doing Tom Hanks's trademark frustrated gestures and things like that, like, oh come on, that kind of thing. But yet he still moves like a doll.
Yeah.
So like when he's running and everything, you can see that he has no sticks or anything in his arms.
You're right. The combination of those two elements, right? The voice acting and the talent there, but also the physical limitations of that object being a doll.
And precisely. Yeah. So that's the fun part about it. Ollie Johnston, who was one of the 9 old men, he animated a lot of Thumper and Bambi, and he did a lot of terrific performances in Disney animation. He used to say, Disney animation it's not copying life, it's caricature of life. You have to take life and plus it.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And you think Toy Story does that in spades? Does it live up to that expectation?
Yeah, I think so.
Can you explain how and why the paths of the Disney Renaissance and the CGI animation wave that followed Toy Story, how they intersected and then diverged? And again, just to kind of catch listeners up to speed, when we say the Disney Renaissance, we're talking about starting, I guess, with The Little Mermaid through The Lion King and beyond, but it was kind of like this renaissance of the traditional Disney animated feature. But it seems like those paths, they cross, but then they diverged.
Yeah. Well, there was a definite current happening, or this sort of cyclical trend in filmmaking. And that was, when I got out of college in 1976, and I looked at and I first decided, well, I want to be an animator. First of all, people told me you were nuts, and they're saying, oh, that business is dying. It's not going anywhere. The other thing is that there was no Disney animation on television. There was no Disney TV shows.
Wonderful World of Disney for the 90s or something, right?
Yeah, and they're mostly rerunning stuff from the 60s. And even that went off the air for a little while. And then there was a thing called the Mouse Factory or something like that. There was like one little thing, what they would just show old stuff, but nothing new. There was no primetime animation. Like if you told me in 1976 that 15 years in the future, the most important show on television is going to be an animated sitcom with a yellow kid with a jagged head, I'd say you're out of your mind. Like that's never going to happen. And features was, Disney would turn out a feature every couple of years for its niche. Disney has a niche audience, a loyalty. The people who love the brand of Disney and everything. They'll go to the films, but the largest share of income the Disney company in the 1970s was the theme parks. So actually, the parks was like where they were doing their best work, and even in the live action features had suffered. Doing things like Herbie Goes Bananas and Condor.
Right, Apple Dumpling Gang.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. When Roy Disney got control of the company in 1984, they were like 15th in box office.
Wow.
Then 2 years later, they were like number 2. And that's when they were doing things like Down and Out Beverly Hills and Pretty Woman and Splash and Never Cry Wolf, and like suddenly they started coming back. They got very aggressive with their movie slate.
But we're talking live action, not animation.
Yeah, live action. Yeah, but then also they decided to get back into television stuff too, with like Gummy Bears and Wuzzles. But this is, Roy Disney with Eisner and Katzenberg. And, I knew Roy Disney really well. And it was a really nice man. He was very soft-spoken. And he would say things gently, like, he goes, People ask me if I care. I gotta care. My name's on the damn door.
It's true.
You're like, okay, yes. He really felt that. He felt that legacy and everything that he needed to get the place back to where its dominant position where it used to be. And at one point, a lot of the executives that they brought over to revive the live action group said, get rid of the animation group and let's just license. We'll outsource the stuff to, third world countries and we'll live off the licensing. And that's where Roy said no. He says, animation is the heartbeat of this company. This company was founded on animation and will never stop making animation. And they pitched the executives the storyboards for The Great Mouse Detective in 1986. And that's when they went, oh, okay. And what happened with the Renaissance, that's sort of, a little different than the digital revolution. Disney's also formed this connection with Broadway, where Broadway was going through a lull at the time as well. There really weren't like a lot of the biggest Broadway plays, musicals at that time were British. So like Les Miserables is British, and Phantom of the Opera is British. So they're all being brought over from the West End.
Okay.
The only ones in the States that were doing something was these two guys, Howard Ashman and Alan Menken. They had done Little Shop of Horrors. And at least it was new. It was something new. It wasn't let's bring back Fiddler on the Roof, or let's bring back West Side Story. It's like it's a new one. This idea that you could connect like that kind of talent, musical talent, with animation. That's kind of like what made the Renaissance really kind of sing. At that time too, like an animated film. If an animated film just broke even, it was considered a success. And then it made its money back in toys and in sale to television or video cassettes. But when we were doing Mermaid, I remember our producer Jeffrey said to us, he goes, "This is going to be the first $100 million box office." And we're like, "You're crazy. Animated films don't make money like that," and it did.
No, it was a sea change moment. Again, that was a touchstone. The Little Mermaid was as innovative for its time, arguably, as something like Toy Story in '95. But again, what I find so fascinating is, you have this trajectory of the Disney Renaissance started by Little Mermaid. And then you've got all these box office toppers from there, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, etc. But then Toy Story, it seems like there's this juncture where suddenly the traditional animated blockbusters, they start to lose some appeal, and it's the next wave has started. And I just find it fascinating, those divergent arcs or those trajectories of the two different units of animation at Disney.
Yeah, it's that, sometimes genres are victims of their own success. Which is you could oversaturate. You could do too much. Like the first video game craze around 1980, 82. Like there was a huge. That's with Donkey Kong and Centipede and Space Invaders,
Pac-Man.
Pac-Man, all that stuff. So big, and then it crashed around 1983. And the big craze was He-Man, which was two dolls, good guy and a bad guy, with no electronics. And you just bang them together.
You, by the way, you worked on the He-Man animated series, correct?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, good timing there.
Yeah, and and it's amazing that of all the stuff I did in the 1980s, I still get invited to He-Man fan conventions.
Wow.
All these folks that are in their 40s, when they were children, this is what they watched, and they were like, wow.
No, I bet you there's some diehards there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, who are asking for some serious autographs, right?
Yes, yeah.
So no, just to finish that thought about the divergent trajectories, is it too easy to just say, well, Toy Story killed off the Disney Renaissance of the traditional animated movie trend?
Yeah. I think what the musicals started to feel formulaic. Like they kind of fell into, you could almost time your watch by, okay, now's the I Want song, now's the villain song, now's the love duet. And like they kept turning them out the same way. And anytime anybody wanted to change the pattern, they get slapped down and say, no, just do it the same way. Like when Brad Bird did Iron Giant at Warner Brothers, and Brad was an ex-Disney animator, he was like, I want to make a movie with no music. I'm sick of musicals, which by 1998, there was a saturation point where everybody was, you had the feeling that the audience was getting tired of the musicals. Now, like when Frozen came back, it had been about 20 years almost without musicals. So suddenly everybody was like, hey, musicals again.
Yeah. Good point.
But that period of 1998, 99, people were kind of like, okay, I'm tired of this. And that's what people started to go to the CG stuff, saying, well, this is new. I've never seen this before.
I appreciate you kind of taking me on that journey, kind of understand that a little bit better. Tom, I wanted to pivot to the influences of Toy Story. It was so influential, of course. You can make a case that Toy Story is absolutely the most influential movie of the last quarter century. Exhibit A. Over 250 fully computer animated films have been released across the globe in the wake of Toy Story, in the research I found. Nearly every major studio ended up producing computer animated feature films in the years after Toy Story. We talked about some of those franchises, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not only did it prove that computer animated motion pictures were big box office, again, Toy Story going on to gross over 400 million worldwide, but it also forever changed the way movies were made. And you so eloquently kind of walked us through that, proving that you could efficiently store characters and scenes and sets and effects on computers, elements that could be easily and quickly repurposed and manipulated for each new frame, right? I mean, that was a major sea change moment as well.
Yes.
So Exhibit B, Toy Story proved that you could break the rules for an animated film. You talked about how the public was fed up with characters always breaking out into song, but also Toy Story proved that you didn't have to base the story on fairy tales or folklore. And you could also go meta in referencing pop culture and cinematic touchstones. In this recent rewatch of Toy Story, I mean, I took some notes here about one after another pop culture references, especially movies. Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Alien, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Psycho, even a nod to Airplane, The Wizard of Oz, The Great Escape, Freaks, that old movie Freaks, The Twilight Zone. There are so many different references and riffs on movies and television in Toy Story that make it so much fun.
When you're talking about pop culture references, the kind of toys that a lot of us grew up with, things like Etch-a-Sketch and Sling.
Yes.
And then, Silly Putty, things like that. The little army men, the little green army men soldiers and all.
Yeah, I mean, all things that are so relatable. They're real world toys. And this is no small point. I mean, yeah, you can kind of be cynical and say there's a lot of product placement in Toy Story and its sequels, but for good reason. We can all identify with those toys. We played with them. We know them. We bought them for our own kids, even if you didn't play with them yourself. And it even invented new toys that didn't exist before that now, Disney and their ilk can go market and sell. Mm-hmm. The truth is they're popular characters and therefore popular toys. So that element is not to be overlooked. Mm-hmm. I was reading also, this was the first buddy movie for a Disney animated film, which kind of broke tradition. But one tradition, Tom, that Toy Story did continue for Disney, the central child character in the movie, in this case it's Andy, is missing at least one parent, his dad. So if you think back to all the classic Disney films, the animated movies, whether it's Cinderella or Pinocchio or whomever, it's usually one or both parents are missing. Snow White, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it does continue that tradition, right?
I actually have an explanation for that. So
go for it.
Yeah, and that is because around the time we were doing Pocahontas and everything, okay. Michael Eisner came to us in the story department and said, "So where's Pocahontas' mom?" He says, the public's killing me out there about Belle and Jasmine, and it's like, where's Jasmine's mom? Where's Belle's mom? And it's interesting that one producer put it nicely. As one producer named Tom Schumacher, he said, in our classic concept of the nuclear family, of the mom and dad and two kids, it says if you have your mom and dad, you don't have any problems, because mom and dad will figure it out for you. Mm-hmm. If there's a conflict or there's some kind of trouble, mom and dad will take care of it. But if you break the nuclear family and you drop one parent, the child by necessity has to become more independent and shoulder the responsibility.
Yeah, Pixar, Disney have proved that they can break from that formula. A movie like Inside Out, where you have an intact nuclear family with caring parents, you still can have plenty of conflict.
Yeah, or like Frozen, where they had parents for like the first 5 minutes and then killed them all.
And that's the other thing. They often kill off one or more parents, which is just a whole nother ball of wax. If you don't mind, I'll continue this exhibit from the bench. But Exhibit C, Tom, this film demonstrated, we've already talked about this, but the popularity and power of animated franchises. Mm-hmm. You get 3 sequels from Toy Story. That's pretty impressive, and of course there's other franchises like Ice Age and Shrek, and they have plenty of continuation of the story. Another proof here of its innovation is that Toy Story spurred more A-list actor talents and celebrities to lend their voices to animated movies. I mean, it wasn't long before voice acting for Pixar and its imitators, that was like all the rage among the Hollywood elite. It's a big deal to get Tom Hanks and Tim Allen on your movie.
Oh, yeah.
Not to say that there weren't celebrities or A-list actors doing animated movies before, but I think that you know where I'm going here. I mean, it kind of set the bar for, wow, we can really attract some big name voice talent to these productions.
I mean, the real first one would be like Robin Williams doing the genie.
That's a good point.
That was a big one.
Mhm.
That was a big one when that happened. And the thing is, for the A-list talent, originally, like the money wasn't as good as it was, in live action films. But then, so the money got a lot better. And for the actors, it's an easy gig for them, which is that they don't have to live in a trailer out in the desert and get up at 4 a.m. and be in makeup at 5.
Yeah.
And then you start shooting at 7 a.m.
Sure.
When I was working at DreamWorks, Sharon Stone would come in like sweats and stuff, and just you do your voice and you go home at 5 o'clock and you can see your family.
That's pretty sweet. I'm sure actors appreciate that.
That's where like a lot of famous old actors like Orson Welles and Laurence Olivier and all.
Mm-hmm. So let me finish this thought here, but Exhibit E, if you will. I mean, Toy Story lent prestige to the animated feature as an award-worthy work. Of course, Beauty and the Beast was technically the first animated feature film to be nominated for Best Picture 3 years prior. But Toy Story, it did receive Oscar nods for Best Screenplay. It was the first animated film to do so. Also Best Music, Best Song. And it got the Academy Awards to pay more attention to animated films and ultimately establish a Best Animated Feature category. And it's arguable that maybe that would never see the light of day without a Toy Story to kind of lead the way.
It was very prestigious. Yeah. I mean, we were just coming off Lion King, which, people forget, but when Lion King came out, Lion King did like Avatar, Jurassic Park business.
I think it was the biggest film of 94.
Yeah. It was the biggest, until Titanic came out, it was the box office champion, and for an animated film, I think it made like 750 million just in domestic.
Incredible.
So it was something like 2.5 billion or something like that when it was all said and done. Yeah, Toy Story was like this sort of new power, that arose in the North that just suddenly was like, wow, where did that come from? Like you say, like a lot of the subsequent success of animated film, particularly computer graphic films, came off the success of Toy Story.
It made entertainment juggernauts out of both Pixar and Disney, Toy Story did. The latter eventually bought out the former, which of course was a shrewd financial move, and that has helped Disney thoroughly dominate Hollywood animation in the new millennium. Of course, there's a lot of imitators and other franchises and studios doing CGI animated feature films. We've rattled them off earlier, but Disney is still top of the heap.
Yeah, I'd say so. Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you, what elements from Toy Story do you think have aged well, and what elements maybe are showing some wrinkles, Tom?
Certainly, the character work stands the test of time. You were saying earlier, you create a very strong story with very strong characters,
Mm-hmm.
and it sticks with you. The great thing about Snow White and Pinocchio is you can watch them now and enjoy them just as much as the audience did in 1938. How many people go out of their way to watch a movie from 1938? Just like, I really want to see Little Miss Marker or The Life of Emile Zola.
Broadway beauties of 1934.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, except for like Turner Classics, you can see it on TCM. But you can watch Snow White and Pinocchio and Dumbo, and it still works. And Toy Story is one of those type of films. You could still watch it, like an audience did 25 years ago. I teach at the University of Southern California. And I always joke, I said, my students right now were born in the year 2001.
Wow.
All these films are as relevant to them as Gone with the Wind was to me. It's like it's a previous generation.
Sure.
But yet they can still enjoy it. They can still enjoy a good movie, And I think the story is that in terms of the things that show their age, it's probably the rendering. And some of the animation of the human and the dog are
Mm-hmm.
stiff. It's a little clunky at that point. I know when I was asked to advise about the story, my advice was to try to stay away from showing human beings. Just keep it all in the toys, kind of like the old Tom and Jerry cartoons. You never saw the human beings. You just stayed on Tom and Jerry all the time.
Yeah, and Charlie Brown.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Don't show the adults.
Yeah. Don't show the adults. Wow.
Exactly. Yeah, I think if you want to nitpick, there are probably a lot of, as you said, the renderings, a few elements in this built world that don't look as impressive as they could be made to look today. You could find fault with the wallpaper or the lawn or the dog, or Andy's little sister Molly, etc. But come on, for 95, they were doing groundbreaking work, and you got to kind of put it in context.
There's a saying among CG pioneers, CG artists, they say today's innovation is tomorrow's screensaver.
So true, right? Yeah, but without question, the characters and the narrative, to me anyway, they remain ageless, resonant, and relevant. The characters even retain plausibility as actual toys that modern kids would play with, which gives the film a few extra points in my book. Maybe there aren't enough female personalities. Maybe there's not enough characters that would particularly appeal to or be representational of minorities.
Mhm.
Again, maybe that's looking at that through the prism of 2020, but it is what it is. And I think the sequels would correct those issues.
Yes, yeah.
This is a birthday celebration, Tom, and birthdays are all about presents. It's the 25th anniversary of Toy Story, except I always contend, Tom, that it's the fans who continue to get the gifts from these movies. So, what's your opinion? What is Toy Story's greatest gift to viewers?
I think its greatest gift is that wasn't it fun when we played with toys?
Yes.
And remember these type of toys and just the friendship and the camaraderie of the characters with each other. And it's fun to look back at, like things like Etch a Sketch and Slinky Dog and things like that, and Bo Peep and the Army Men,
Mhm.
and, all those different things. And I think that it speaks to the child in all of us.
I couldn't say it better, but just to riff on that, yep, I think its power to instantly transform us back to our youth and make us think of the possessions we held most dear at that time, which was, our playthings. Absolutely, one of the greatest gifts. It's a testament to the power of imagination and play, of the joys of being a kid, as you said, and the wonder of seeing the world through someone else's eyes. In this case, it's the eyes of a toy, imagining that such a thing is possible, which is a great concept.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that its second greatest gift, one that's no less important than the first, is that it encouraged adults to not so easily dismiss animated movies as childish or unworthy of their attention.
Mm-hmm.
Grown-ups quickly realized after watching Toy Story that animation could speak to their demographic and they could, be immensely entertained and satisfied. These are the folks paying for the tickets who often, kind of grumble, oh, my kid wants me to take him to see the latest animated movie, and, you roll your eyes kind of a thing, but not with Pixar movies. I mean, you talk to most adults and it's a joy to go to these movies.
Yeah.
They learned that rewards came to those who paid attention and allowed themselves to be immersed in these imaginative worlds. And lastly, Tom, this film introduced two of the absolute greatest characters in cinema history, not just animation history, cinema history, Woody and Buzz. They quickly became crowd-pleasing household names and unforgettable kind of tune celebrities, in large part due to their eye-catching designs, the stellar vocal performances by Hanks and Allen, as we talked about, and also because of the way they harmonize and contrast with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Again, one is, after all, an anachronistic cowboy doll, and the other is a state-of-the-art Space Ranger action figure. So talk about a fun collision of cultures and eras.
Yes, yeah, and what's fun too is like how even though Woody's the older character, Woody's more of the realist, and Buzz is a little more of a tunnel vision. He's got this idea of like, he's still playing out his scenario of being a space ranger.
It's so great.
He's like, you're not a space ranger, you're a toy.
Really, if you boil down it, the funniest element of the movie
Mm-hmm.
is how those two characters relate and don't relate. The contrast and the comparison between the two is just delicious to me.
Yeah.
But Tom, do you think Toy Story will still be widely watched and considered relevant in another 25 years? What's going to happen to the legacy here of Toy Story? Is it going to get kind of buried in the avalanche of all the better, new and improved CGI movies?
I think it'll stand the test of time. There are films like that do just become classics. Things like Snow White, 101 Dalmatians, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Frozen. There's these films that you just circle back to. You enjoy watching them again and again. And I think Toy Story is one of those films that never really grows old.
Yeah, I would agree. I think debatably the film's greatest and most evergreen asset is its story, the superb dialogue. There's so many infinitely quotable lines in Toy Story that me and people in my circle continue to cite today. I mean, Simpsons is infinitely quotable too, but Toy Story, I tell you, I go back time and time again to that quotation well of Toy Story. It's great. But my hunch is that future families will continue to introduce their youngsters to the first Toy Story it's going to at least be playing somewhere in the background in many a household, much like kind of like the Wizard of Oz is today.
Mhm.
And it will continue to hold a great nostalgic value among those who saw it for the first time in the 1990s. You just mentioned that a lot of your college students in your classes born in 2001, I mean, they grew up with this movie playing on their television sets. So I think there's going to be a lot of nostalgia, repeat value to watching this and also introducing it to your kids and maybe even your grandkids. And of course, there's going to be a life in terms of animators, artists, creative professionals, and they're going to keep looking to Toy Story as an example of what's possible when you draw deep from the well of imagination and indulge your inner child.
Mhm.
So that's my hope for it anyway. What are you currently working on that listeners should check out?
I have a couple of books out and everything. So besides moving animation, the history of computer graphics, and I'll be the first one to say I'm not a scientist, I'm not a tech geek, but I did focus a lot on the human story of the inventors, of the people who created this concept of computer art that basically is so dominant in your media today. You look at your phone, you look at your TV screen and stuff, you're going to see computer graphics everywhere. One book I just finished that's doing quite well is I wrote a cookbook, which is kind of strange.
Wow. I mean, a real cookbook with recipes and
Yeah,
so forth.
yeah. It's called Eat, Drink, Animate, the Animator's Cookbook. It just started as a joke where, like about 40 years ago, I was an assistant and I worked with a fellow named Grim Natwick. He created Betty Boop. And he also was the lead animator on Snow White. But anyway, he was very proud of his personal chili recipe. So after I finished working with Grim gave me his chili recipe. And I said, gee, I got Grimm's chili recipe, and I've got Walt Disney's chili recipe. And a good friend of mine in Tokyo working at Ghibli gave me Miyazaki's recipe for ramen. And I know that Bill Hanna-Barbera liked to cook barbecue for his artists. I said, I could do a cookbook.
Oh, well, such a good idea.
It's just a crazy idea. And I just started asking, Chuck Jones' family gave me one of Chuck's dishes. Pete Docter, who's one of the leads on Toy Story, as well as he's the head of the company, head of Pixar right now. He gave me a recipe. So I've got about 12 Oscar winners, about 5 Emmy Award winners, and everything from very complex to very simple. And then there was another guy who used to direct death metal videos. And he gave me a recipe for something called picklebacks, which is basically a whiskey with a pickle juice shooting.
Amazing.
Whatever you're into. So
gets the job done. What are some other books you've written in the past that you'd like to remind readers about?
I have a book called On Animation: The Director's Perspective.
Okay.
And it was me and a colleague, Bill Croyer, who's another Disney animator who he also directed Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest. And Bill and I did a bunch of interviews with a lot of our peers, which a lot of these top animators like John Lasseter and Brad Bird and Brenda Chapman and Vicki Jensen and all, and and just basically talk shop. About the process of directing and creating animation.
Tom, you've sold me. I've got to do some Amazon catching up, and I'll be looking a little bit closer at your authorship there. So thank you so much for giving us some good reading material recommendations and for spending so much quality time with us here on Cineversary. It really was a treat to talk to you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Wow, talk about a cartoon catharsis. A great big thank you to Tom Sito for taking the oh-so-scenic route with me to revisit Toy Story, an all-time great that hasn't lost a step in the quarter century since its release. Let's turn now to standing ovations. Yep, this is where I give a shout-out to a movie, TV program, podcast, book, website, or other work that I believe would be of interest to classic film lovers. This month, I want to throw my recommendation behind a fascinating new documentary called Skin, A History of Nudity in the Movies, which has actually been available on Hulu and on demand for the past few months. This is the definitive doc on adult birthday suits in cinema, and while it will certainly appeal to the debauched and one-track minded, Skin serves an important function, folks. It chronologically details the facts and public fascination behind varying states of undress in motion picture history and what became acceptable and unacceptable for that matter. This film features interviews with actors and filmmakers who pushed the envelope, like Malcolm McDowell, Peter Bogdanovich, and Mariel Hemingway, as well as key scenes from controversial and nakedly significant pictures like Ecstasy, the 1933 erotic drama starring Hedy Lamarr, The Pawnbroker from 1964, A Clockwork Orange and The Last Picture Show from 1971, 1972's Last Tango in Paris, teen sex comedies from the 1980s, Showgirls, Striptease, and American Pie from the 1990s, and lots more. But this isn't exactly a shameless attempt to titillate. Skin looks back on these films through the prism of the present, especially the Me Too movement, and examines the pressures imposed on actresses to disrobe, the degree to which moral standards have changed and evolved over time, and the, obvious exploitation at work in many of these movies. It is a documentary for mature eyes only and those not easily offended, so I recommend keeping the kiddies away here. But I think you'll find it insightful and informative, providing a different spin on many of the rated R entertainments we've watched over the years. Check it out and see for yourself. Instead of cluttering up our podcast with advertisements, we've decided to ask our listeners for their support. We could use your help to offset the costs to produce Cineversary, which includes expenses like podcast hosting provider fees. If you'd like to make a monetary contribution to the Cineversary podcast in any amount, large or small, we've made it safe and simple by partnering with PayPal to collect the funds. Simply visit tinyurl.com, that's tinyurl.com/donate Cineversary, and click on the Donate button. Any major credit card is accepted, and the entire transaction is handled securely and confidentially by PayPal. Or if you're familiar with PayPal, you can simply send us a payment in any amount you want to cineversegroup@gmail.com, and that's spelled CINEVERSE group@gmail.com. We really appreciate your generosity. Also, I'd love to hear what you think of our Cineversary podcast. You can email me suggestions or comments at cineversegroup@gmail.com. And I encourage you to visit cineversegroup.com, the portal for my film discussion group that I launched in 2005, where you can hear podcast recordings of our group discussions and read more about the movies we study. And so we come to the conclusion of yet another episode and another year of Cineversary. But rest assured that we've got lots of great birthday celebrations planned for 2021, and we are going to kick things off in January in high style by feting what is likely the most acclaimed and admired work of Charles Chaplin. It's City Lights, which marks a 90th anniversary next month. This has been your humble host, Eric Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, stay safe and healthy through this lingering pandemic, make it a happy holiday season, and cherish those classic movies because
Older they're not getting, young Padawan. Better they're getting.
Thanks again for listening.